If you know my channel at all, you know that I love classic PlayStation games. I've spent the last year replaying games like Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Crash Bandicoot, even Spyro the Dragon. And the more I replay these games and just play these games for the first time because I missed them as a kid, I end up asking myself kind of the same question: what happened to PlayStation? Because when I look at modern PlayStation, it's nothing like the games or consoles that I grew up with as a kid. So in today's video, I'm just going to kind of cover things that I think are going wrong with PlayStation that kind of started maybe 3 to 5 years ago. From their obsession with live service games to rising the prices and just doing anti-consumer things. And more importantly, what I would like to see change going forward. So for me, the number one factor when deciding whether to buy a console or not has always been the games. What games can I play on that platform that I cannot play anywhere else? The only on PlayStation mark has been missing for a long time. And if we look at PS5 today, 5 years into its life cycle, the argument becomes harder and harder to make. In fact, if we're only talking about PlayStation Studio games that are exclusive to the PlayStation 5 and cannot be played on PC, there are surprisingly few of them. Now, Sony recently announced they will be changing their approach to PC releases. And honestly, it makes complete sense to me. For years, they were heading down the same road as Xbox, where if you owned a decent enough gaming PC, there was very little reason to buy the actual console itself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all of these PS5 exclusives are bad. Some of them definitely missed the mark for me, but others I genuinely had a great time with. My issue isn't necessarily the quality of the games, it's the quantity. Because when you compare the PS5's first 5 years to previous PlayStation generations, the difference is pretty staggering. The PS2, for example, had an absolutely massive library of first-party and exclusive titles by this point in its life cycle. It felt like Sony was constantly experimenting and giving players something new to try. Now, I can already hear the argument: Dan, mate, games like this are way too expensive to make now. They take longer to develop and they look incredible. And that's true, modern games are bigger, more detailed, and more expensive than ever before. But I'd argue somewhere along the way, PlayStation became obsessed with graphical fidelity at the expense of variety. A lot of the PS2's biggest games still hold up today, not because they look realistic, but because they had a strong art style and a clear creative vision. They weren't chasing realism, they were trying to be memorable. In fact, I deliberately waited until the recent state of play before making this video because I thought maybe Sony would surprise me with something completely different. But after watching the showcase, I came away feeling like I had seen more of the same. More third-person, over-the-shoulder, cinematic action games. And again, I do not dislike these games. I'm excited for Wolverine, and the new God of War spin-off game looks okay. But I just want a little more variety. I want PlayStation to take risks again, and I want games that feel gamey. To me, this trend kind of started after The Last of Us. That game was incredible and deserved every bit of praise it received, but it feels like Sony spent the next 2 decades chasing that same formula. Big budgets, realistic visuals, serious storytelling, and over-the-shoulder cameras. Meanwhile, some of the games that stand out most to me these days are the ones willing to embrace bold art direction and creativity. That's why the new Rayman reveal caught my attention immediately. It was colorful, stylish, and visually distinct. It looked different. And that's really what I miss from PlayStation. Not necessarily better games, but a wider variety of them. But speaking about things becoming more expensive, let's look at PlayStation's pricing. Alright, so let's actually build a PlayStation setup on Best Buy and see what this really costs in 26. First of all, we're obviously going to need a console. Let's add the PS5 Pro to the cart. That's around $900. Now, I also really want the DualSense Edge controller. It's got swappable sticks, the back paddles, the carrying case. Honestly, it looks pretty premium. Let's chuck that in too. And that new 007 game that just came out. I've been hearing good things about that, so may as well grab it. Maybe also the Lego Batman game. I've heard that one's been pretty fun as well. And of course, I'm going to need PlayStation Plus, so let's just grab a year basic online membership so I can actually play anything online. And I also can't forget a pair of headphones. All right, let's check the cart. We've got the console, a couple of games, the controller, online access, and headphones, and the total comes out to $1,320. Now I hear you, that's a pretty loaded cart. Not everybody needs all of this to start playing. So let's change it. Let's remove the headphones, and instead of the Pro console and premium controller, let's just go with the standard PS5 and a normal controller. Now the new total is $920. How Hell, this is just a console with one extra controller, 2 games, and online access. And we're sitting around $900 just to get started, and I might be able to justify that price if the ecosystem around it felt packed with some must-play exclusive games, like older PlayStation generations. But right now, it doesn't feel like that's the case, and that's where it starts to feel less like value and more like you're just paying more for nothing. A few years ago, at one of PlayStation's State of Plays, Sony made it pretty clear that their future direction was going to be more focused on live service games. And since then, we've seen how that's played out. We've had games like Concord and Marathon, and I'm not really going to dive too deep on those because if you've been following PlayStation at all, you already know how that conversation goes. But what's more interesting to me isn't the games that have been released, it's the projects that weren't. There was a Last of Us multiplayer live service project that got cancelled. Also, the Spider-Man multiplayer live service game that got scrapped as well. And when you see franchises like that being pushed into live service direction, it really makes you step back and ask why. Because at this point, it feels like every major franchise has to justify itself as a long-term online platform rather than just being a great single-player game. We're also getting a live service Horizon project, which honestly doesn't really inspire much confidence. I actually really liked the Horizon games. They're some of the best looking and most polished open world games PlayStation has done. So to see that energy being shifted into a multiplayer live service game direction instead of the next game in the Horizon series is so baffling to me. And then one that hits closer to home for me, the new Ratchet & Clank live service mobile game. This is one of PlayStation's oldest and most iconic mascots, and getting that before we can see the original trilogy properly preserved and easily playable on modern systems is really frustrating. It just raises the question, who asked for this? And then on top of all of that, there's the DRM side of things. So recently, it's been discovered that some digital PlayStation purchases require periodic online verification, meaning if your console doesn't check in online after a certain period, your ability to access those games can be restricted. Wasn't this the thing that we were criticizing Xbox for during the Xbox One release time? And now it feels like we're slowly moving back towards that same direction. For me personally, that actually pushed me away from digital purchases almost entirely. I've started focusing more on physical games again, even older titles, just so I know that in the long run, I actually own what I'm buying and I can still access it, even if the platform changes in the future. And that's really what it comes down to: control, access, and who ultimately gets to decide what you can play and can't play. So what would I like to see change? Honestly, it's not that complicated. First of all, I think PlayStation really needs to rethink its push into the live service genre. At this point, it feels like they've tried it multiple times and it just hasn't worked in the way that they probably hoped. I think it's time to just take a step back and accept the losses and move on. Instead, I'd rather see a return to what made PlayStation so strong in the first place: consistent, high-quality, single-player games. Why are we only getting one major exclusive a year when this is a company with multiple world-class studios? If they can't consistently hit that pace, then lean into your back catalog. There are so many beloved franchises just sitting there and could be brought back or reimagined. And speaking of that, I would love to see more focus on preservation and backwards compatibility going forward. A PlayStation 6 that supports games all the way back to the PS1 would be incredible. I know the PS3 is tricky because how it was built, but even just making that effort to preserve PlayStation's history would go a long way for fans like me who have been there for decades. And on top of that, I don't really see a world where a console like the PS5 Pro needs to be as expensive as it is. And honestly, it makes me a bit worried about what the PlayStation 6 price is going to look like when it's eventually announced. Now look, they're probably not going to do any of these things. In fact, most of it probably won't change at all. We'll still get great games here and there because PlayStation studios are still incredibly talented. But overall, it just feels like the platform has been doing the bare minimum for a while now when it comes to output and variety. And that's really what this video is about. It's not that PlayStation bad now. It just feels like it's lost a bit of what made it exciting in the first place. And at the end of the day, isn't that what PlayStation is supposed to be about? Games? Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.